Hello to the chicos and the chicas. We are going to be inside my head. We're going to be the GM. A friend, actually. The victim of ours today is going to be Grandmaster Zhongguan Zhao, a lovely guy from Sydney. Used to and still does actually represent Australia in many chess events, most notably the Chess Olympiad. And every now and then we bump into each other on .com usually, where he trashes me usually. This time round, I think the score was 6-3 to his favor, but this is a game where we managed to shine, and I decided to show you this because I thought it was an overall interesting game to learn a fair bit from. So, we're kicking off with the King's Indian defense against which in my beginner's repertoire, the 1d4 beginner's repertoire, I recommend Bishop e3, a system named after the legendary Svetozar Gligoric. So this is the Gligoric system, and of course Zhongguan knows that knight c6 is a failure here, and instead opted for the line with c6, knight g4, e takes d4, even pawn h6 is a legit move here, or are legit moves. So after c6 I went with the thematic d5, knight g4. This knight move is almost always played to kick the bishop and disrupt white's optimal piece layout with knight d2. Bishop g5, scoring a tempo on the queen, f6, and the bishop goes on this very weird excursion in order to eventually land on f2, the ultimate diagonal where we can support all kinds of queen's side shenanigans. Knight a6 was played, very normal. Castles c5. Now this is the first point where we need to talk a little bit about the structure and about what is going on here. So in the King's Indian, traditionally white is playing on the queen side, usually trying to play for a c5 break. Now having the knight on a6, obviously that would be played by a3 b4. In contrast, black is aiming to play f5 and create a kingside attack. Now after c5, however, there are changes in the position that we need to take into account. The most prominent one is that the queen side is a lot more difficult to crack up even after a3 b4, but black is also struggling to play f5 because of the pin here. So now the game still continues in a very logical fashion where both sides are trying to accomplish their respective goals. Black is coming at me on the king side, and I'm having a go at them on the queen side with a3 b4. But for now, I need to respond to f5, and I actually made a slight mistake here, a judgment mistake, because what you need to know, and this is a lot of, this pops up in a lot of games and people simply pass by it by autopiloting into f3. You always need to consider this capture, especially when there is no gf available, which would allow black to have 2 pawns here side by side on e5, f5, covering all the central squares. Because once the knight takes on f5, and usually people go like, oh, it allows the knight on d4, that's bad news. No, there is a very important positional lesson to be learned here. Number one, first of all, we get to trade off the light squared bishops. Huge game for white, because this bishop is a tragic piece of work there. And after knight d4 takes, let's say rook takes, comes knight e4. And at this point, we need to stop for a second, because a very important comparison needs to be made here. And many a club level player would misunderstand and misevaluate this. They would go like, knight on d4 is a monster. Nope, no it's not. This is the monster on e4. And I tell you the reason why too. Number one is because the d4 knight is actually exchangeable. I can do this, or I can dance around with this knight and trade it off. But two, and this is much more important for us to see, there is nothing in the range of the d4 knight. It hits 8 empty squares, of which 7 are very firmly in white's control, with the exception of f5, where it actually came from. Now, that doesn't mean that this is a garbage piece, because covering these squares is still annoying. But fundamentally, it does not cause any headache to me whatsoever in the long run. In strong contrast, this knight is hitting juicy targets every single way, and in particular the d6 one is a very vulnerable spot. And if you imagine that we remove every single piece of the board except for these two knights, then all of a sudden white is winning the game because these pawns are loose and the black knight is hitting nothing. So I didn't even look at this, which was my mistake. But then again, we are talking about blitz games, so a lot of the moves are being played on instinct, but here by instinct let me down because this should have been played without a shadow of a doubt. So f3, f4, bishop f2, rook f6 was played, and here of course in spirit of queenside aggro I played a3 preparing b4. Everything is super duper normal, and after rook g6, dang it, I just displayed the move that I wanted to test my audience on. We arrive at the key moment in the game, because at this point I was beginning to consider the fact that my opponent's attack on the king side was actually faster and significantly faster than mine on the queen side. b4, b6, and g4 is pending, and it's very, very annoying. And so here I broke one of the most important rules of which side we are meant to play on by playing g4. And I was very proud of myself for this move. It is not one that is completely unusual in the King's Indian, but it's one that, you know, sometimes it's very good and sometimes it's very bad. Excuse me. Now, the idea, of course, is to hold the kingside attack as best as I can, buy time so that I can hurt my opponent on the other side. Interestingly enough, capture, which looks like the natural response, is bad according to the engine. And knight f7 is the way to go. Frankly, I'm shocked by this because I thought after king g2, h5, h3, I managed to seal the king side off and black has nothing. And yeah, after anything, I have b4 and I'm going to kill them on the queen side. And I'm looking at the engine eval and it's 0.1. The engine wants bishop f6. A move that I do not understand, so I'm going to test it. b4 and bishop e7. Okay, so the engine goes into complete bunker chess mode, but for a human, it is incredibly difficult to digest that this position is no more than a tiny, tiny edge, because it seems that there is nothing on the king side. I have rook h1 to cancel everything out, and I have all the time to pile up on the queen side. Rook b1, eventually take a4, a5 if b6 comes. I'm almost going to say that the engine evaluation is a bit off here. Alright, I might make myself look like a goose, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that. Anyway, after takes, the game is going to change in character very, very much, because now the battle is going to be fought on the king side and in the center entirely, and here my opponent lost the plot, so to speak, or at least the thread in terms of how to continue. Bishop h3 was necessary, kicking the rook, and only then g4, and even here after f4, white is clearly ahead. Instead, however, my opponent played g4 and I played f4. And now it turns out, and this is very often the case in King's Indian scenarios where the center breaks open very unexpectedly. And what that phenomenon is that in general, my pieces are far more optimally placed for a combat of any kind, really, as long as it takes place on the board rather sooner than later, than my opponents. My opponent's pieces are not really ready to fight. My opponent's pieces are optimally placed, or optimally is even not the right way to put it. My opponent's pieces are not misplaced so long as the position remains closed and we are attacking one another on the respective sides where we are meant to. But as soon as the position blasts open like so, it turns out that my opponent's pieces are very, very poorly coordinated, whereas mine are ready to fight. And so in a blink of an eye, we went from a very messy, close position, according to the engine, tiny bit better for white, to a completely dead lost position to black. But conversion is still an important thing. Positionally speaking, What we need to note here is that we have fatally weakened the e5 square, and we also made this bishop a semi-hero. So these are the two things that I must deal with rather sooner than later. So if black had 5 moves in a row, after rook g5, they would go knight f7, knight e5, pawn h5, and that would be absolutely a knight c7 to cover e6, and I'm out of this contest. So I'm on a timer, but for the time being, the position looks really, really good. So now it's important that we play forceful moves. So let's go bishop e3, threatening knight e6, exposing the rook. Rook goes to e5, and now I'm beginning my fight for the e5 square, dropping the knight back to d3, covering e5. Rook e8 was played, and at this point I missed a winning idea that is very difficult to spot, in my opinion, for a human in a... Ooh, I forgot to turn on the light. Sorry guys if my skin was glaring now, hopefully it's gonna be better. So yeah, this is something that I think is grandmaster level chess, at the very least, especially in Blitz, to find. I played e5, by the way, and I was very proud and very impressed with myself. I'm very good at being impressed by myself. Because what I thought was that I needed to take the e5 square away from my opponent, and bishop takes e5 simply drops a piece. And after d5, I was considering playing something like knight e4 or bishop takes h5. But it turns out that the best move here is the immediate capture on h6, which is very counterintuitive because it's best piece for one of the worst. But the idea is that now we have e5, and when they take, we have got knight e4. And all of a sudden, knight f6 check and bishop takes g4 is on the board. Believe it or not, this position is already +5. In fact, 5.6. Rook f8 and yeah, just bishop takes g4 and positional carnage. Again, knight on e4 dominates the board. If they take, we just take back with the king. This check is completely useless. And again, look, it's optically a beautiful piece here. And now we're talking about +9. Simply take, queen g4, rook f1, and the white pieces are flooding in, and neither of the black minor pieces are doing anything at all. Now, the reason why the engine doesn't like my move order, which is essentially a transition, because after d I can do take and go back to it, is because of knight f5. Guess what? That's precisely how the game went. And when knight f5 landed on the board, and I don't want to brag, but I really want you to acquire this mindset for your games too, I don't think I hesitated a second to take this, which is only second best according to the engine. And for the second time, I'm calling bollocks on that one, because the engine wants queen d2. That is sinfully ugly. And if knight e3, then queen e3, and if bishop e5, I must be blundering. Take, and queen h6 is winning according to the engine. Yeah, bishop d3, and this king is too exposed. Not a human way to play when you get to chuck in an exchange and then play e6. At this point, I felt like $1 million. Like, this is a position that is just so good to play as a human, and so frustrating actually to play when you are playing it against an engine that can defend like a goddess and a half. To begin with, I didn't realize that bishop d4 was a bit of a rain on my parry type of move. And here I'm going to show you an absolutely beautiful idea. After queen d2 comes the evergreen theme of the crosspin. And all of a sudden, I don't feel like $1 million. We are winning still with knight f4, but you can see that black is trying to throw the spanner in the works in as many ways as possible. My opponent, he played queen c7, and for the second time I managed to ruin my best point in the game. And here I'm very, very proud of the move that I played. Very proud of it. Because I looked at queen bishop takes g4, engine's top choice, by the way. And my calculation went bishop g4, queen f6, and with the queen sliding to g6, I began to feel like black was sort of handling the kingside situation really well. And then I went, okay, why don't I just develop queen d to rook f1, not take this? And if they do the same, queen f6, I go rook f1. And if queen g6, I have knight f4. And now the queen on g6 is extremely silly. And to my mind, even though I have already looked at the engine's eval, it is still a very, very compelling case of not playing this but queen d2. And having seen the engine's argument, I would still play queen d2 in a game purely because it's an easier position to understand, to play, and to just get my head around, especially in a blitz game. And this is a textbook case when the engine's best move is not necessarily best for practical purposes, because here after queen f6, the engine wants here, and this is everything that I did not want to allow in the game. The black pieces are now getting active, and they're getting active on the king side, where I want to murder my opponent. And here you need to play very precise moves in order to stay on top. And even now, as I'm looking at it, I don't like it. And I would even argue that this is not as good as the game continuation, which was queen d2. Ignoring the pawn, and in fact just trying to instead building up the attack without allowing black to come to the fore. Now, admittedly, rook f8, rook f1, and queen e8 still may bring black back into the defense, but I still insist that this position is way easier to play for white than the one we looked at before without the pawn on g4. Okay, so queen d2 was played, b5 was played. He's obviously trying to wiggle somehow and try to create some play on the queen side, but now I'm fully focused on my king side attack, so I'm ignoring everything. Rook f1, take c4, and from here on the game is over. His only chance here to stay alive was rook f8, when potentially again bishop g5, queen e8, knight f4, with my pieces flooding in on the king side, looking very, very promising. The irony is that now the main plan is queen d1, bishop g4, still hunting the g4 pawn. Instead, my opponent went take c4, and from here on out, this turned out to be one of the most memorable games I've ever played online, because I took on f5, he took, I took, and now the king side attack with this pawn wedge on e6 just becomes absolutely unbearable. He played rook b8 once again, trying to, you know, seek some sort of counterplay down here. I played queen h2. Now we are looking to do the damage on h7. And at this point I realized that I actually created one of the most beautiful threats that I have ever created in my life in chess. And luckily, the spied sacrifice knight takes e6 did not stop me. So I think it's a good point actually for you, dear viewer, to stop the video and try to figure out the forced win that I managed to find here in the game. And that's a chance for me to engage with my chat as well with what is the forced win here for white. So I'm going to take a breath here. Chat is already figuring it out. So the wrong answer is, of course, rook f8, which would allow knight takes f8, defending the pawn on h7. But boy, oh boy, queen takes h7. That is the deal. And after king takes h7, rook f8 is a checkmate that, yeah, I've never seen before as a motif. And needless to say that it put a massive smile on my face. So this is the Matutski. I have already tweeted this final position on chess Twitter. And now it is the time that we show it to the world of YouTube as well. An absolutely bonkers checkmate, crowning a game that once again I think I played rather well, especially considering that it was a 3-0, so there was very limited time to consider everything. I did check, as I told you, it was played on .com, 3 inaccuracies and a missed win. And the irony is that the missed win, according to the engine, was the fact that I didn't play bishop takes h6 here. So that was a bit hurtful, but overall a very, very happy experience and a cool game. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to smash the sub button, the like button. Please don't forget to like me, super thank me if you can, and I'm going to be back with the next video soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.